Step into a candlelit world of royal intrigue, covert weddings, and breath-snatching escapes across the midnight Thames. This video unravels the real-life thriller of Lady Arbella Stuart, the brilliant rebel born fourth in line to the English throne, who battled palace paranoia, outwitted spies with lemon juice ink, and risked everything for a forbidden love that shook the Tudor Stuart dynasty. Follow her meteoric rise under Queen Elizabeth I's suspicious gaze, her secret dawn marriage to William Seymour, and the heart-pounding manhunt that ended in the Tower of London. Expect dueling bloodlines, coded letters, cross-channel chases, and a hunger strike that still echoes through Westminster Abbey stones. Shot with cinematic storytelling and backed by razor-sharp historical research, this episode gives voice to a woman history tried to silence and reminds us why courage, romance, and rebellion never go out of style. If you crave binge-worthy drama with the bonus of being 100% true, hit play, hit subscribe, and let Arbella's untold saga light up your screen. Share this journey with history buffs and discover the courage coded between every line of parchment. Arbella's cradle rocked to a lullaby of conspiracy. Picture hard stone halls hung with costly arras, torchlight flickering over arms of Lennox, Cavendish, and Tudor as courtiers traded rumors by the hearth. A baby girl, fourth in line. Charles Stuart, himself the younger brother of Lord Darnley, husband to Mary, Queen of Scots, had dared to marry Elizabeth Cavendish, daughter of the redoubtable Bess of Hardwicke, without securing Queen Elizabeth's prior nod. Among Tudors, that was like launching a rocket without air traffic clearance. The Queen's reaction was swift and surgical. The newlyweds briefly jailed, their mothers interrogated, and a network of informants embedded so deeply in their households that even the wet nurse's yawns were tallied and archived. Arbella's christening in the spring of 1575 looked to the casual visitor like any glittering aristocratic baptism, but concealed near the font, behind floral garlands and silver ewers, stood two agents in plain ruffs, quill pens at the ready to log every conversational ripple. Barely 13 months later, the infant's first lesson in fragility arrived. Her father dropped dead. Some said of consumption, others whispered of slow poison. Bess of Hardwicke took one glance at the swirl of opportunists descending on the widow and snapped into defensive formation. She whisked mother and child to Chatsworth, her fortress manor in Derbyshire, where walls of honey-colored gritstone rose above terraced gardens like a medieval power suit. Yet even within those stout enclosures, the Cavendish women could not unclench. The Queen's Privy Council dispatched visitors under pretext of logistics, overseeing repairs, auditing accounts, when in truth they were mapping every corridor, every servant's loyalty. And while little Arbella soon learned the scent of beeswax polish and polished Malmsey oak, she also absorbed subtler odors: tension in the linen cupboard, ambition in the drawing room, fear in the maid's nightly prayers. When Arbella turned 7, tragedy struck again. Elizabeth Cavendish succumbed to an infection following what may have been a miscarriage, tossing her daughter headfirst into the emotional vacuum of orphanhood. Grief left the child restless, pacing the gallery corridors beneath portraits of ancestors who stared down with steady, untroubled eyes. But Bess, indomitable, steel-spined, opened a new chapter. She hired humanist tutors, versed in Greek, Latin, French, and Italian, engaged musicians to coach madrigals and lute, and surrounded the girl with needlework, astronomy charts, and tongue-twisting orations from Cicero. Rumor insists the playwright Christopher Marlowe, between penning subversive tragedies, stealth taught Arbella to parse Seneca's metaphysics. True or not, the young lady's intellect blossomed like a forcing bulb, bringing daylight to rooms once heavy with mourning. That brilliance, however, shone too brightly for some palates. The jewel of Hardwicke caught the gaze of matchmakers before she could braid her own hair. One bold scheme, hatched when Arbella was 8, would yoke her to the 2-year-old Lord Denbigh, aligning Cavendish wealth with Denbigh lands while circumventing Elizabeth's marriage embargo, a toddler engagement in the service of empire. When word reached London, the Queen erupted. She banished Denbigh's father, summoned Bess for a humiliating inquest, and dissolved the arrangement faster than an alchemist's failed tincture. Denbigh died mysteriously months later. Bess recorded a tight-lipped lament, but Arbella schooled herself in the first of many griefs, forged by politics rather than nature. By adolescence, Arbella had mastered the art of velvet obedience masking stubborn steel. During her one glorious visit to court in 1587, she dazzled onlookers with her facility in languages, executing a brief Italian sonnet for an ambassador, then pivoting to Latin repartee with a bishop. Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, barely 20 and already famed for reckless charm, applauded a tad too enthusiastically. Whispers of over-familiarity fluttered down the corridors, quicker than moths to tallow. Elizabeth responded by exiling Arbella back to Hardwicke, Essex receiving only a scolding glance. It was the first time the girl tasted the double standard. Men may flirt with danger, women live in it. Years turned, calendars replaced queens' portraits with new miniatures grown subtly older. Spain's armada thundered and sank. Essex flirted with doomed rebellion. Europe jittered like marionettes on confessional strings. And still Arbella waited, writing letters in slanted italic hand to cousins, begging for news, dreaming of marriage as the sole passport outside gilded captivity. Bess guarded her like a crown jewel, even as she aged into arthritic sharpness, signing missives on Arbella's behalf, vetting suitors, and plating the girl's future with expectations heavy as Elizabeth's own chain of state. But in winter 1592, the tide at court shifted decisively. Counselors, seeing Elizabeth's vigor wane, began championing James VI of Scotland for the English succession. Arbella, once the bright alternative, dimmed in strategic value overnight. The Queen clamped a diplomatic quarantine on her, ordering that the young lady must not leave Derbyshire without license. Hardwicke Hall, previously safe harbor, ossified into a bougie prison. The walls of Hardwicke were paneled in oak and gossip. Servants passed rumors like cups of spiced ale. Arbella's letters to potential husbands intercepted, her reading list inspected for heresy, her handmaidens bribed for pillow talk. In one delirious winter, she wrote to an Italian cousin outlining a hypothetical match with the ducal heir of Parma. Pure fantasy, scribbled in Latin as if spilled from her classical exercises. The letter vanished en route, materialized months later on William Cecil's desk, and earned Arbella a Bastille-style debriefing, so bruising that she collapsed into migraines for days. Her resilience, however, was titanium. In spring 1602, aged 27 and brimming with revolutionary restlessness, she plotted what she considered a love match and rescue mission rolled into one: marriage to Edward Seymour, grandson of Lady Catherine Grey, and second cousin once removed to Elizabeth herself. Genetically speaking, their union could spawn a Tudor-Seymour hybrid with a claim torrential enough to rewrite the succession. Arbella felt destiny's tug. Seymour, for all accounts a respectable if unremarkable gentleman, felt perhaps the magnet of upward mobility. The plan relied on clandestine couriers, cipher alphabets, and a sympathetic priest. It unraveled because Arbella, ever conscientious, trusted a childhood governess who quietly served the Queen's spy ring. Disguised letters were seized, Seymour folded under questioning. Arbella spent 3 nights weeping onto the blank parchment she'd reserved for wedding vows before dictating a confession in which she apologized for folly conceived by overmuch affection. Elizabeth accepted the performance, but her health ebbed, and within a year the Queen lay entombed beneath a marble effigy in Westminster. Enter King James VI of Scotland, now James I of England, striding south through cheering towns hung with garlands and salted oxen. Arbella glimpsed the cortege from an oriel window, heart ricocheting between hope and dread. Cousin James might champion her freedom, she reasoned, yet he was also reared on cautionary tales of cousins who stole crowns. Within a month of coronation, the new king summoned Arbella to Greenwich, greeting her with cousinly warmth and a hawk's appraisal. She dazzled again, her French accent refined, her wit quicksilver, and left the palace convinced she had secured a fresh start. James granted her a household allowance, permission to linger at court, and a promise, delivered with that Jamesian half-smile, that a suitable husband would be found. But paranoia is a hydra. In summer 1603, ringleaders of the so-called main plot courted Catholic backers to overthrow James and seat Arbella as queen. The conspirators expected gratitude. Instead, they received exposure. Arbella marched straight to Sir Robert Cecil and spilled every coded overture in exhaustive detail, her voice reportedly steady, even amused. James rewarded her loyalty with a jeweled brooch and permission to participate in court masques, those multi-million-pound spectacles of rhetoric and silk where ladies personified goddesses on platforms moved by hidden wheels. Yet beneath the theatrics, his council kept tabs. When Sigismund III Vasa's envoys floated a match between Arbella and the Polish monarch's brother, imagine a Catholic-Protestant joint venture with geopolitical aftershocks. James vetoed the idea before ink dried on the draft treaty. So by 1610, Arbella was 35, unmarried, and acutely aware that a noblewoman past 30 acquired an aura of genteel obsolescence. She masked anxiety with cultural hustle, translating Petrarch, composing lute songs, exchanging botanical specimens with scholarly nuns in the Spanish Netherlands. Enter William Seymour, 22, dark-eyed with a scholar's stoop and lineage no less combustible than hers, descendant of Edward Sickens' aunt, raised on bedtime stories about his great-grandmother, Lady Catherine Grey's thwarted claim. Court pageants threw them into proximity. Music rehearsals prolonged that proximity into conversation. Mutual recognition ignited the spark. Contemporary diaries record them debating Tacitus in a window seat, Arbella's laughter floating like harp glissandi across the great hall. She saw in William neither opportunist nor jailer, but a partner in the perpetual chess game of survival. They married in secrecy on a May dawn. Witnesses included a sympathetic chaplain who murmured scripture about binding two into one flesh while glancing nervously at the bolted door. The ceremony lasted 15 breathless minutes, after which Arbella slipped a slender gold ring into her glove and sailed to the king's mask rehearsal as though nothing had changed. But secrets rarely stay buried in London clay. Within weeks, rumors seeped from tailors who noticed Arbella's sudden commission for silk doublets. William sighs. A disgruntled footman sang after 2 ales in a riverside tavern. A scroll containing their marriage record fell by improbable coincidence into the hands of one of James's cryptographers. On June 18th, the Privy Council pounced. Arbella was placed in the custody of Sir Henry Bronker at Lambeth, allowed 2 maids, a chaplain, and minimal correspondence. William was lodged in the Tower's Beauchamp Tower, cells painted with graffiti from earlier prisoner poets. The couple's only connection became letters written in lemon juice ink, their invisible words coaxed alive by candle heat. One such note, later discovered and preserved, contains a tender passage. "Though stones divide us, my thoughts hasten nightly to your window and beg admittance." But the tower's warden employed staff fluent in espionage. Intercepted pages reached James. One contained mention of our hoped-for little one, fueling speculation that Arbella carried a child whose veins would combine rival claims into dynamite. Historians still debate whether pregnancy was real, imagined, or deliberately fabricated to secure leniency. Whatever the truth, the king's anxiety spiked. Imprisonment carved trenches in Arbella's spirit, yet sharpened her resolve. She sold heirlooms left by Mary, Queen of Scots, gold miniatures, enamel rosaries, to fund an escape network of boatmen, priors, and Flemish merchants. Disguised rehearsals turned her sitting room into a shabby theater. Maids pinning up her hair, pressing a gentleman's hat to her brow, binding velvet bandoliers across her chest to flatten curves. She studied male posture under the watchful eye of a musician friend, learning to swing arms from the shoulder, not the elbow. Meanwhile, William bribed a warder to slip him files for sawing iron bars and a rope ladder coiled inside a lute case. Their joint breakout was timed with the precision of an opera overture. William would exit the tower at midnight on June 3rd, meet a boat at Gravesend, and sail for Flanders. Arbella would feign illness to secure a doctor's visit. Then, amid the confusion, don her disguise and ride at speed to Lee, where a French hoy awaited. The universe loves irony. Storms grazed the east coast that night, delaying Arbella's departure by crucial hours as her physician fussed over false fevers. William, however, succeeded, slipping down rope, padding across muddy stones, and gliding into the river fog. At dawn, Arbella finally boarded her skiff. She clenched borrowed pistols under her cloak, mouth salt dry as the Thames widened towards the sea. Off the Kentish coast, she sighted the French vessel, white sails billowing like a redemption hymn. Then came the chase, 2 English pinnaces bristling with muskets, spurred on by word from London. Arbella's captain pushed canvas to snapping point, but the king's ships drew alongside near Sandwich Bay. Grappling hooks flew, soldiers clattered aboard. Sir John vomited the ruse, with one glance from a suspicious lieutenant. Arbella was shackled, tears scorching her cheeks not for capture, but for William, whose fate she could only guess among the whitecaps. Returned to the tower, this time not a guest but a state prisoner, she occupied the Queen's house, a timber-framed lodging, ironically airy compared to dank stone cells but saturated with echoes of Anne Boleyn's last nights. Her window overlooked Tower Green. She could almost trace the route headsman's victims walked. She requested books, needlework, and her Italian harpsichord. The council granted the first 2 and denied the third, fearing coded messages could hide in sheet music. Physicians diagnosed melancholy compounded by wild imaginations, prescribing bloodletting and wormwood tinctures. Guards changed shifts every 4 hours to prevent fraternization. When Arbella purchased a set of diamonds from a jeweler, hopeful attire, she insisted, for Princess Elizabeth's upcoming nuptials, word reached James, who sneered that delusion was its own worst jailer. Isolation warped time. Days collapsed into one long penumbra of bells marking matins, terce, and vespers. Arbella embroidered biblical scenes until her fingers cramped, then paced 12 measured steps up the chamber, 12 down, reciting psalms in Latin, Greek, and English to keep rust from her brain. Only sparrows nested on the window ledge, offered fresh conversation. Yet through cracked mortar she heard London's ceaseless heartbeat, ironmongers clanging, fishwives haggling, distant cannon salutes on St. George's Day. Each external noise hollowed her further. If God permitted ordinary people to taste spring's bustle, why must she wither behind curtains? Rumors of another escape coalesced in autumn 1614. A sympathetic laundress agreed to smuggle rope in bales of linen. A Dutch skipper idled near Tilbury, ready to speed toward Leyden. But Tower officers, ever attuned to aberrations, intercepted the laundry, found knotted cords, and tightened restrictions to near monastic silence. That winter, Arbella's appetite evaporated. She wrote one last letter to William, never delivered, in which she confessed nightmares of inky waves swallowing our cradle. Meanwhile, William, safe in Flanders, petitioned continental princes for leverage. But European monarchs measured risk versus reward and withheld intervention. By September 1615, her body betrayed her convictions. Fever gnawed, joints swelled, and she refused broth. Claiming heavenly command to fast, chaplains pleaded. The lieutenant of the Tower offered pardons, contingent on cooperation. She answered with saint-like smiles that scared them more than any curse. On the evening of September 24th, she spoke faintly of a corridor illuminated by glass more brilliant than Hardwicke's, where her mother and father waited in summer garments. At dawn on the 25th, her maid found her inert, skin parchment thin, eyes half open, as though still scanning for sail masts on the horizon. News of her death crossed London Bridge by midday. Some courtiers sighed relief, others penned polished condolences. King James authorized interment in Westminster Abbey, befitting her noble birth. No marble effigy was carved, a plain ledger stone sufficed. Perhaps he feared that a grand tomb would magnetize dissenters. So Arbella lies in the vault of her Aunt Mary, Queen of Scots, a subterranean family reunion sealed beneath black and white checkerboard tiles, trodden daily by tourists who know nothing of the woman inches below their souls. Yet death has never been the final word for story. Over the centuries, antiquarians exhumed her letters, limpid, witty, rebellious, and found in them a proto-feminist manifesto. Playwrights drafted tragedies where Arbella survives, boards a French stagecoach, and births a daughter whose very laughter topples tyrants. Novelists cast her as an Elizabethan Scheherazade spinning tales to keep executioners at bay. Even modern social historians scroll her correspondence and glimpse the universal ache for agency, to love whom we choose, to shape our own passports, to walk out the door without a chaperone armed with royal warrants.